Hello and welcome to another Packaging Europe podcast. I'm your host, Victoria Hattersley, and today we're talking about paper bottles, which is a subject that has obviously created a huge amount of interest in the industry over the past decade. I'm joined by Jamie Stone from our friends PA Consulting, who, as many of you might know, together with Paul Pack via their joint project, the Bottle Collective, are now testing dry moulded fibre caps. We're going to talk about the progress made to date in this very much evolving area and whether we'll see paper bottles move beyond the current niche position they occupy. Hi, Jamie.
Hello there. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. And in fact, just to give a shameless plug here, Jamie will also be taking part in a roundtable discussion on this very subject at this year's Sustainable Packaging Summit in Utrecht in November. So we can consider this, what do we call it, a palate prepper for the main course.
Exactly. It's a preview to the great conversation we'll have.
Yes. So thanks again, Jamie. If we dive in right away by looking briefly at the background behind this. So when the notion of paper bottles was first mooted, I think it's fair to say there was a certain amount of skepticism about the viability of this technology. Do you think this has changed now that more and more brands and developers are entering the field?
Yes, the skepticism makes sense. I think paper inherently has no barrier and doesn't hold moisture particularly well. And so there's an enormous amount of development to do, not only to form shapes, but also to add anything that's remotely functional as a barrier beyond a few minutes of holdout. So the skepticism is entirely valid. The progress, though, across multiple different companies and developments has been pretty good, to the point where I think we can now see line of sight in several places to commercially viable scale production in the short to medium term future.
Yeah, it's definitely moved on very quickly. I mean, it was what I think back in sort of 2018, 2019, we started to sort of report on it, and it's not that long ago.
No, exactly. The early adopters back in the day when we were founding the Bottle Collective, which was 2022, we did a good audit of where the bottle companies were looking, the paper bottle companies. And we found 10 or 15 technologies, most of which have disappeared, but there've been a couple that have run the course. So Polpex and Pabrico, probably the two bigger of them.
Yeah.
The Ripax team, which are now I think probably called NBCO, they're still in there making some super quality wet molded fiber. And knowing that the PA Polpack connection is the only way to do a dry molded fiber bottle, we gave a long consideration to a right to succeed and a right to get a point of difference in the market before we put our own stake down. And we totally believe that there's a future where we'll be in not mid scale, very big scale, in the hundreds of millions, which is where you need to be really.
Yeah, and I obviously wanted to ask you about the work of the Bottle Collective and dry molded fiber route, and what kind of distinguishes this from some of the other solutions we're seeing on the market, which have taken slightly different approaches, and why do you think this has sort of a good chance of scaling?
Okay, so simply put, wet molded fiber, which is the predominant other side of it, that's Polpex and Pabrico and NBCO and a few of the others. They all base on the same technology, and that technology has been around 100 plus years. We all know what a wet molded fiber egg box looks like. So it's taking that technology, advancing it significantly, but it still has the same base, as in it's a very wet slurry of paper that's injected into a tool of some description, and then you need to dry that part. And so drying all that water tends to take quite a long time. Different technology will be different spaces, but somewhere between kind of 45 and up to 90 seconds. And that will use a lot of energy because you're trying to dry a part very fast. Dry molded fiber, essentially, no matter what you're making, whether it's a blister pack, a cap, a bottle, or even a meat tray, the dry molded fiber base has no water content in it that isn't just atmospheric water, about 8% that just lives in the atmosphere. And so that means that when we're creating a part, we don't inject it in, we compress it into a shape. And that forming time happens in about 3 seconds. It's between 3 and 4, depends on what you're trying to make. So orders of magnitude faster, of course, because you're using energy for a much shorter amount of time. It's much more energy efficient. We don't use water, so it's much more water efficient. So the baseline of the technology shows really good sustainability efficiencies across various different areas. Applying that to a bottle is a technical challenge of how to form a bottle. The basics of dry molded fiber were there for us to use.
Okay, so theoretically, it has benefits not only in the production stage but also further downstream.
Yeah, it has benefits everywhere. One of the other benefits that we don't particularly talk to too much, but if you think about sort of the precision engineering of something, where you need a lot of precision in something like a bottle when you get to the thread area, anything with a high water content that you dry at speed, that water has to go somewhere, and so the shape will have to change a little bit because there's less in it than there was when you started. Controlling that is quite difficult. So with dry molded fiber having essentially nothing to have to come out of it, there's no water leaving. When we form a shape, it forms with high accuracy and then doesn't change. That seems like a fairly arbitrary point, but when you're doing things like screw fixtures, or if you wanted different parts where you want to do clip features, that's really important. You need to have really accurate geometry. So we model our geometry to be not too far off from where injection molding is, so 0.1, 0.2 millimeters per part. That seems to be far better than wet molded as an option.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I also wanted to talk a bit about the kind of common public misconceptions, I suppose, we see around paper bottles, and how you think that this kind of might impact levels of acceptance and how we can address this. For example, you see occasionally there have been social media backlashes, and I think that probably comes down to a sort of fundamental misunderstanding that we still need some kind of polymer lining at the moment, at least. So how do you think this impacts the speed at which this technology is going to be taken up?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question because it's difficult to answer. There's a few things at play. So there's what the MRFs are built to collect today, so mass recycling facilities. There's what they would be able to collect tomorrow. It's reasonably obvious that they don't collect things they don't know exist. So things like 3D paper structures as bottles don't exist in scale, so we have to learn how to recapture them. So that there's a question of, can it be recaptured now and next as a key point? That takes you to policy and regulatory around what you're told to do. There's a lot of policy driving for purity of materials. It is actually impossible to make a paper bottle without any kind of barrier, whether it's a spray coat or a liner.
Yeah,
you need something to keep the moisture in. So that is going to be a mixed material, which is the right thing to do for the planet for that technology, but does fall foul of where policy is taking us. So these conversations will need to sort of happen. In terms of the consumer backlash, they're led by what they see in the press, and that's reasonably understandable. I think the education hasn't been great so far. To some degree, the backlash is understandable if you take the pulp off and you've got a viable bottle underneath it. So one of the policies that we have with our technology is that, yes, we do use a polymer liner. Sometimes it's PET, sometimes it's PEF. We are exploring non-oil based polymers. So PEF is non-oil based, and we're exploring things that go into alginates and beyond. In each of those cases, what we want consumers to understand is if you destroyed the pack and took the pulp away, the thing in the middle isn't a viable product on its own. It's essentially a carrier bag of liquid, so not something you could sell on a shelf. And so that if you then consider what the materials are doing, the pulp is there to do the structure, the brand, the beauty, all of the stuff that shows you that you want to purchase it, and all of the security and safety and supply chain. The liner is there to keep the liquid or the tablets or whatever safe until consumption. So that in the old days of plastic, it used to do both of those jobs, or all of those jobs. Now we separate them out. So that liner is to do product safety until consumption. Everything else is done by pulp. And if you take them apart and see what is essentially a a weeble of liquid and realize, well, you couldn't put that on a shelf and sell it, I think you do start to understand that there's a real benefit there. If that plastic lining becomes so thick that it's essentially a bottle with a jacket on, then you can understand why you get claims of greenwash, because it feels like you didn't need the pulp bit. We're trying to use the 90-10 policy. So something like a 2.5 or 3 gram liner for a 550, 600 gram bottle. That will be much more understandable that it's not a bottle in a bottle. It's a carrier bag in a bottle, which I think then changes the conversation. There are the technologies that look at the spray coating. They're less obvious use of material, and the consumer won't quite understand if that's a good or a bad thing. It might be assumed to be good. I'm not so sure it is, because that that spray coat needs to stick to the fibers in order to create a base to put the barrier on. So you need a primer, maybe 2 primers, and then some performance coatings. You might end up putting more contamination into the bottle while hiding it away a little bit safer and lowering the ability to get the fibers back, which will by definition make them less recyclable. So what the reality shows and what consumers think aren't the same. That's the job of brands to educate as the technology matures, to show where the real successes live.
Yeah, so a lot of it comes down to communication, I suppose.
It does, and we use in the trials we've done, the 2 Diageo ones, we use the term progress over perfection, which I think is the right term to use. We're not saying we've done it as good as it can be done. If we all wait till the utopia, no one will ever launch an innovation again. So this is the right time to put some stuff out. We do test and learn. We've got 5 or 6 improvements within the studio that we're looking at, but they'll take time to develop. And of course, they'll change once we find out what consumers think of what we're doing today. So that continual improvement is the correct way to do it.
And you mentioned the regulatory aspect. So what kind of specific regulatory changes would need to be put in place in order to make this a viable kind of product and part of the recycling stream?
That's a big question. The problem that we have, whether it's regionally, through a country, through a continent, or globally, is that there's so many variations of the policy. Just within England, there's so many variations of the truth of what happens when you put things in the bin. We need some kind of standardization. Policy is obviously trying to drive standardization so it's easier to get things picked up in a recycling facility. Where it's tripping up innovation, there needs to be an understanding that, well, perhaps innovation's allowed a bit of time to get itself in shape. It's quite hard to put the same rules that you would put on a plastic bottle or a glass bottle onto a brand new material and hope it can get there. What it's doing is actually stifling innovation that could be really interesting, because it falls foul of policy. So some kind of exemption while technologies scale is likely pragmatic. In a bigger order of time, there should be some really big money spent on understanding how to make one recycling system for the world. The big companies, the Diageos, the Procter & Gamble's, Unilevers, they make products for the entire globe. And so it's not like the products are unique in England versus the US versus Indonesia. So we should be able to find a system that's just workable.
Okay, thank you. I'm also kind of interested in learning your thoughts, moving sort of broader, to your thoughts on any new or kind of emerging projects that have particularly interested you. For example, there's the disappearing fiber-based bottle that was pitched at Davos in 2025. Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I don't know enough about that one to have any truly educated thoughts, if I'm honest. There are so many technologies coming through. What I quite like, where we're looking at bottles or indeed other things that are using alt fibers as a base and then barrier on top of it, is if you separate the 2 jobs to be done, one of them being the structure, the ergonomics, the brand awareness, all of that, and that's the job of the alt fibers, and then the barrier doing the product safety. If you separate the 2 into work streams, it makes life much easier, because each of those will change. So if we look at, again, if we look at a bottle, now they're PET, so that's oil based. As we move to PEF, so non-oil based and higher barrier, and then we can start getting creative and maybe Cyoxin, maybe looking at alginates as a base. Here in PA, we're really big fans of the 2 or 3 companies leading the way in spatial atomic layer deposition as a future barrier. Currently only works on 2D. If it can be developed to work on 3D, you end up getting barriers at 1% of material thickness, material density. So in a world where you could have 99% paper and 1% barrier and still have an effective barrier, you can't do that today, but the science of it shows that we might be able to do it tomorrow and in the future. And then you've got really exciting new alternatives. They all need to be developed and they all need to be tested. And ultimately, the ones that will win will be the ones that work best, most cost efficient, and deliver the best product. That's why it's fun to do.
Yeah, of course. So spatial atomic layer deposition. I'm going to have to go away and read up on that. That's a fairly new one to me. You're more immersed in this than I am, obviously.
It's super exciting.
Yeah. No, I will have a look at that once we're done today. I'm also kind of interested to learn your thoughts on the announcement by Pabaco and I think Blue Ocean Closures last year that they would be introducing the industry's first market-ready paper bottle and fibre-based cap combination. Do you think this is an accurate claim?
It seems accurate, doesn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Our technology in dry molded fibre, we are developing a closure, and so absolutely, there are other competition out there, and competition is healthy and great. And those 2 companies coming together, if they can commercialize, depends what you mean by commercial launch. How many parts does that mean? But it's viable. That's not a claim of whether it's the best or most cost effective or the longer term solution, but all of these technologies putting a statement out there, I think it's seen that we're in competition with each other, and I don't see that. We're actually all trying to answer the same questions of how do we move away from single-use plastics, or actually in that case for Absolut and the work we do with Diageo, from very heavy glass bottles into a much lighter material. So actually we're all trying to do the same thing. I truly believe the dry molded fibre is superior, but doesn't mean we're going to be first every time.
Yeah, I think I was saying this to somebody the other day, or they were saying to me that it's important that there are so many different players in particularly kind of an emerging niche area like this, because it's the only way to normalize these things for consumers and for retailers. If there are many different solutions, if there's just one, then it's always going to look like the outlier, isn't it? So
it is.
I agree.
It's good to have diversity as long as they all do deliver a fairly common benefit to the planet. There is a worry that if you go to the recycling facilities, and those are the ones that are trying to collect all of the stuff and put it back round again, and of course, they're picking up waste and probably not making great margins from that. If some of these technologies are seen to not be worth picking up, I find recycling as simple as, you can't pick everything up and put it in the right bucket, so you pick up the stuff that makes you more money. If there are some paper technologies that are less valuable than the cereal box alternative, they will just get rejected, and then that can have a reflection on the rest of the technologies, that they're just not very recyclable. So we've got to be careful to make sure the data is supported. We do measure our data for recyclability and fibre recovery per part to make sure that we are better picked up than left behind. You've seen that in other industries, in toothpaste tubes, for example, where quite a lot of them are recyclable, but very few are actually successfully recycled, because some aren't, and you don't want to accidentally pick up the ones that aren't, because you didn't want to do that. So it just makes it slightly easier to not do any than to do it wrong.
I've kind of heard examples of how AI can sort of help with the downstream end of things in kind of making recyclability more efficient and being able to pick up certain things that aren't picked up at the moment. So I don't know whether you think that's something that's going to come into play more as well.
It certainly can. There are quite a lot of companies looking at AI engines for that. There are also quite a lot of other technologies. If you look at Polytag, where they put in the invisible QRs so the machines can read it and understand what to do with it, I think they're great technologies. There's a whole host of technologies that can work. It only works when it's in more of the recycling facilities than not. If it's in one and it's really effective, that's great, but you can't tell your pack which bin to go into, can you? So
No.
it needs to be everywhere at once, and that will just take time or really, really big investment to make sure someone puts it everywhere.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. Looking at I think unfortunately we're coming to the end of our time here, but also to finish things off, I wanted to get your thoughts on what the realistic long-term prospects for paper bottles really moving beyond niche are, and what sort of time frame you think we might be looking at when we can really sort of see these on the shelf all over the place.
I think we started.
Yeah.
The technology we didn't really cover yet is Frugal Pack, which of course are already commercial. They're different in that it's 2D cardboard folded around to look bottle shaped.
Yes.
And it's kind of, from a layman, I guess it's slightly more bag in box reshaped than it is a formed fiber bottle like the other technologies are doing. But they are commercial. And kudos to them for doing that. I think the formed fiber ones will start to get into launches in the 10,000s. We're in the 10,000 sort of scale launch at the minute. That's a trial really for any big brand, and there's no reason why that's not moving to hundreds of thousands and then millions in the next 12, 18, 24 months. Other technologies are looking similar. Of course, Polpex just got a really large amount of funding to build a big factory, so there's quite a lot I think we'll see in the next 18 to 24 months and beyond that will be really interesting. The thing long term, I think, will be a key differentiator is whether you can effectively still command the brands, like what we would call in structural packaging, the key brand assets. So if you look at the work we did with Diageo on the Johnnie Walker bottle, that looks like a Johnnie Walker bottle in every aspect. It fits their brand language, and we work with their brand partners to do that work. If you look at the Frugal Pack, it looks like a wine bottle, which is great when you do a wine bottle. I think it's less great when you put gin in it because it looks like a wine bottle with gin in it. And that lack of structural packaging differentiation, I think, will be a limiter for those that can't, and it will be the unlock for those that can. If you walk around a supermarket, most of the way you would describe shopper is the see it, choose it, buy it, or the 10-5-1. So that 10-foot view, most of that is done by brand blocking and shapes. And if the shape becomes a commodity, it's hard to do that. It's the reason why Tetra Pak is always hard to love, because it just looks like a square, and it might have orange juice or laundry in it. You don't quite know until you get right up to it. You tend to love shapes like Coca-Cola bottles or Kikkoman soya sauce bottles because they're so beautiful in their shapes. And once you can do that in structural packaging, I think that those technologies will be the ones that really win. That's been a key focus for our technology in the Bottle Collective.
Okay, interesting. So the longer term is really kind of getting to grips with this brand differentiation and shape differentiation rather than whether it's viable in itself technology wise.
I believe so. I did a presentation just last week actually where I showed some great paper based. They were actually sort of more like bags. It was one of the coffee brands. And in order to show the differentiation, they show a picture of the glass bottle on the paper bag. So it shows that the brand shape is still crucial to shopper differentiation, but you're still reflecting back on the thing that you're trying to design out of. So that the new materials need to be able to hold 3D structural form in a way where designers can make those meaningful brand assets. Otherwise, there will be commodities. If you go to the aisle and everything looks the same apart from the brand logo, you'll never be able to drive a premium because you'll lack desirability. So that's the key unlock. I am a designer, so self-serving a little bit.
But realistically, that's always going to be a consideration for brands.
I think so.
As much as
if
they
you
care
look across
about.
look across the industry, and over time, so much money has been spent understanding structural brand language as a key brand driver, and it won't go away. So the technology that can deliver it, those will be the ones that will succeed and the ones that will drive a premium.
Marvelous. Okay. I think that's covered everything I wanted to go through today. So maybe we'll leave it there and I shall harangue you no further.
You're more than welcome to harangue.
Should perhaps do that another day. But just to let our listeners know, we'll be publishing a longer report on this topic in the membership section of our website. So look out for that in the next few weeks. And finally, of course, thank you again, Jamie, for your time. And we look forward to seeing you at the summit in November to worry at this topic a bit more.
I look forward to having this topic on stage with fellow technologies and brands alike.
Okay. And thank you, everybody, for listening. Have a good day.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.